Traver, what's up, man? I've been looking forward to this conversation.
I have as well, my man. It's been a long time coming.
We had to do that intro twice because we've got, it seems like we have some internet, maybe connectivity issues. We've got a storm out front as we just moved here to Maine. I'm learning what a snowstorm really is. Where are you from, man? Where do you live?
I'm in Vancouver at the moment.
Oh, okay.
And,
Yeah. So,
it's a long question. I've spent about 20 years in California, and then recently, after about 3 years on the road, moved to just outside Denver, Colorado.
oh,
And
yeah.
fortunately, coming here, man, I drove here, and then Denver got like 36 inches of snow in one night. I was like,
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm just hanging out in Vancouver for a month, and then heading down to Costa Rica to teach for a bit, and get some
Yeah, that's
surfing
cool.
in.
And get some surfing in. Is that what you said?
Yeah. The one thing, Denver's great. It just there's a little bit of a lack of an ocean.
Yes, there is. I'm not
Perplexing.
much of an ocean guy. I grew up actually in Southern California, and one of my buddies took me surfing once, and I almost died. And I'm like, okay, that sport's not for me, and started doing other things instead.
It's got a heavy learning curve. It's like jujitsu, right? But you got to
Oh,
just
no
keep going
doubt,
back
man.
and going back and going back.
Yeah, I mean, I stood up for maybe like a half a second, if that, and just fell, and then I kind of got tossed around on the wave a little bit, and I came up to the surface just in time to get crushed with another wave. And I was like this, and I was just like tumbling in the bottom of the ocean. I could feel the ground underneath me. I mean, it
Right,
was
right,
it was
right.
kind of scary, actually.
It is scary. And then you realize too that you're in like waist high waves and people are riding things that
Yeah,
are, 60, 70 feet high. You're like, oh
I
wow.
know, man. Some of what those
Okay.
guys do, like I see these like these big wave surfers, and I just think the ones that have to get towed in. I'm like, that is insane to me. But
Insane.
I think it's pretty cool. I actually think it speaks to our nature as men to look for adventure, to embrace some level of risk, and
100%.
unfortunately, it just doesn't seem like that many men are living to that, which is kind of the thread of your book and the
Yeah.
conversations that you seem to be having lately.
Yeah, I see a lot of guys, Ryan. I don't know if it's just the proliferation of social media, but it's like they can almost get that itch scratched by looking at pictures and video and image of other guys living the life they want to live. And that's like it's the 2% I feel okay about my own life. And maybe someday I'm going to be in that same adventure. And then the lack of, okay, that actually takes 3 years of training. That takes 5 years of training. That takes a lot of suffering and misery, a lot of courage, a lot of just being completely outside of your comfort zone. And so I agree with you. I think, God bless Instagram. It's how a lot of people find both of us, but it's also it's dumbing down the male.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's that. I also think we see the highlight reel, to your point
Mhm.
earlier about, we don't see the 99% of the work and the effort. Jiu-jitsu, you brought up jiu-jitsu, and I know you've been a longtime practitioner of MMA. It's like you see somebody, you're like, oh, I could do that. I
Yeah.
could kick that guy's ass.
Hmm.
And then you get on the mats or you get in the ring and you're like, oh, this is real. Like, you can do it when you're wrestling around with your 8-year-old kid, and then you get in the mat with another 200-pound man, and you're like, oh, this
Yeah,
is
yeah,
different.
yeah. I showed up to my very first jujitsu class. This was at Eric Paulson's place, and this was a decade or so ago. And I had a black belt, and of course in Taekwondo, and was like, yeah, I'm gonna
Yeah, I
pick this
got
up
this.
in like 3 weeks. I remember a couple hours later, literally lying in bed and just shaking, like having almost like small seizures, and trying to figure out what just happened to me. And
Yeah,
it was from guys that were 30 pounds lighter than me, guys who I would look at in the street and be like, oh, you're adorable.
right,
It
right.
just ate me alive. And I realized that one, I'm exhausted halfway through the warm up. So, first of all, we haven't even gotten to the juice yet. And
Yeah.
I don't know shit about shit. So, you're right. It's like so much of what we see men doing, or that you want to see men doing, is like learning a language. You see them writing the poetry, but you never see them sitting down and be like, that's a verb. Study
Hmm.
those for a year. That's a noun, right? Like that's a basic guard pass. Study that for a year. That's going to be, but it's boring. I don't care. Get it down. Until you get this, you don't get to graduate on. And so many guys, as you know from jujitsu, like in the first 6 months, they're out.
Right.
That's like the highest dropout rate is just in those first 6 months. You go, oh wow, this will not be fun. It'll be, awkwardly masochistically fun.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not
If you're
gonna be
sick, it'll be fun. I think you're right. I mean, but not only is it boring, it's painful. And I'm not just talking about jujitsu or physical exercise or activities. I'm just talking about putting yourself in uncomfortable situations, which is something that I think you and I would agree is critical.
critical.
It's just uncomfortable and it's painful. Like you're gonna look stupid, you're gonna feel stupid, and you're gonna be silly and you're gonna mess up, and it's gonna cost you time and energy and resources. People are probably gonna mock you and poke at you. It's just not comfortable. And I think that's what keeps a lot of guys from doing it. Because we live in a society that's like instant gratification, like feel good, like give me my likes without any risk. Like I don't want to be in pain at all.
And there's no risk to the ego hiding behind a screen. Right?
Yeah.
You go to a jiu-jitsu class and see what your ego does. Where it's just you're losing and losing and losing and losing and losing. Go try to surf. You're gonna look like a kook for months. Like literally, you are the highlight reel on YouTube of like, look at this guy making an absolute fool of himself. But yet that's the price of entry. You don't get to be where those guys are in the highlight reel until you're willing to do that. And I agree that a lot of guys just aren't willing to suck at something, right? Especially once you're proficient at something else, then to go back into okay, I'm a white belt. Now, whatever it is, whatever it is, it's really hard for guys to make that leap back to like, okay, I can leave my ego in the car.
What is that? What it is? Ego? I mean, do you think it's more than just ego, or is it just, hey, I just want to fool myself into thinking that I'm great and have everything figured out?
I think it's, if this was 10 years ago, I'd say it's just ego, because there was nothing, there wasn't like an overarching, not movement, but an overarching sentiment for guys to say like, it's okay, we can just keep ourselves small, we can keep ourselves down, we don't have to pursue that life, or it's even going to be encouraged not to societally. Like 10 years ago, it was like, I want to be that, and society was like, go do that. Now I think there's a bit more of an undercurrent of, it's okay, we'll just coddle you, you can feel good at home, just watch TV and look at your Instagram and be quiet. Don't make a lot of noise. And you're great. You're a good man. We love you. You're a nice guy. Welcome to being a nice guy.
What do you think is the root of that? I mean, I have my own thoughts as to why, because I believe what you're saying and I agree. But what's the root of it? Why is that the case?
I'd say it's a multi-issued or multi-factored issue, right? Like, again, social media playing a big part into it. I think just generationally, we have we've seen the over pendulum swing of feminism. We've seen the pendulum swing even after Me Too, of, hey guys, we want you to shut up, be quiet, and stop leading. The leading that we've seen in the past, or the leading that we're going to identify, is toxic. So I think as an overarching issue, that comes into play. And then you do have these things, and I'm holding up my cell phone, are the single greatest invention on earth, and they're the devil, right? We can blow an entire weekend sitting there texting with our friends, looking at social media, looking at women, getting dirty texts from women, and not leave the house and go, wow, I had all of these experiences that in the 90s, I would have actually had to get up, put some clothes on, take a shower, go out and do some shit, and maybe get dirty, get hurt, fall down, look stupid, take a risk. And we don't have that. That's not the necessity anymore. Right? I think that's a big part of it. What do you think it is?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you said is right. I think it's not a necessity. I think generally humans are looking for the path of least resistance. And if it's presented to us that way, then we're going to travel that path. Yeah, it was funny. I was out here, speaking of the storm we have right now, I was out here last week because we had some snow. And I was pushing my kids down a little hill that we have in the backyard. And the first time I pushed them down, they went 40 yards, right? And then the second kid went on that same path and he went like 70 yards and then 80 yards, right? It's like, because you smooth it down, right? And so it's that path of least resistance. And I think what we do as men is we entrench these behaviors about the way that we live our life, and it just becomes hardwired into the way that we do it. And it's so easy, right? Like you talk about in your book, it's so easy to sit on a computer and jack off to porn as opposed to go out and court a woman and put yourself out there and expose yourself to risk. It's so easy to look at other dudes on Instagram and see all the lifts they're doing than it is to get up early and, in my case, go outside where it's cold and actually physically exert yourself. So I think the fact that it's harder, but I also think that there's two other major factors. One being that there's institutions, and I think it's the media, I think it's the medical community to a degree, and I think it's the government that is deliberately and intentionally undermining masculinity. We can get into that.
Sure.
And then I think there's a whole other subset, a subgroup of people who have bought into that lie that are now just following it blindly without even really giving it thought. So they're not being devious or even intentional about the undermining of masculinity. They're just going along with the narrative.
Yeah, they're complicit.
Right.
Yeah. Right. That's when you brought up the original question, I thought so many people, men and women, are complicit in complacency, and that shows so accurately on us that we are primarily the doers. That's the leaders, the push forward, the forge new ground, to get out there and risk getting knocked in the dirt. And if men especially aren't holding other men to it, if it's like, hey, what is a great gathering of men? Well, all winter, what we do is we go sit inside all weekend. We watch football, we Instagram, we drink beer, and we don't do anything. And I have nothing against any of those pieces or even any of them in a group. I have an issue when that's your life.
Right.
And that's at the end of the winter, the end of the football season, the end of the summer, whatever, the end of time, you're looking back and going, man, I really wish I got out there and did some shit. And I really wish the guy next to me was like, this isn't that much fun. This isn't that awesome. Look, there's a fucking mountain right there. Let's go climb that mountain. Oh, let's go shoot that animal. Let's go get into some adventure. Remember what 40, 50 years, remember what our grandfathers were doing? They were walking across the damn country. They were like scaling mountains with like shitty rope and, crampons they made themselves. And we're not. So yeah, I'd say complicit and complacency, but I'd love to hear your thought on that trifecta of, was it media, government, and especially medicine?
Yeah, I mean, one indicator of that alone is the American Psychological Association's quasi-researched study on masculinity. And you actually, I don't think you alluded to it in your book, but you tiptoed around it without, I think, knowing. But they talked about traits that we would generally consider as masculine. So competitiveness, aggression, and stoicism as being somehow inherently dangerous, destructive, and or toxic to our young boys. It's like, dude, those competitiveness, aggression, the stoicism, the control of your emotions, the understanding and control of your emotions are dangerous. Like, this is ridiculous. And this is the body that's the governing body that's dictating a lot of the way that psychological evaluations and treatment are administered in the United States. So if they're undermining it, then what are treatment plans and young men who are coming into psychologists getting this type of treatment, how are they going to be treated and how are they going to be diagnosed because they happen to be male and masculine? Right.
Yeah, I did talk about it. I didn't name the actual study, but I remember reading that and thinking, you got to be fucking kidding me. Those are three of my most highly generated traits, and the traits I celebrate the most, and the traits I celebrate most in other men. Yes, that's not saying that there doesn't have to be another side, that there doesn't have to be emotional intelligence, there doesn't have to be sensitivity in men, but we don't just push the softer side by killing and wiping out and shaming and eliminating the side. I remember, Ryan, when I read that, I was like, there were just fires in California. And I was like, really? There were huge fires all over Southern California, in Santa Barbara especially. I was like, so you're going to tell the fire department what the toxic traits are: leadership, aggression, and stoicism. You've got guys who are literally walking into, fields of fire with those three traits front and center. Like, are we going to stop? Like, hey guys, you know what? Actually, don't go fight that fire. The American Psychiatry Association has just said that if you do this, you're toxic.
Right.
We'd love for you to go home and actually go to therapy and work on this, and we'll just let these fires rage. Like, that's not happening.
And it's the convenience of relative safety. You know, we can mock and bitch and moan and gripe about toxic masculinity when we're in a safe environment, but when it all hits the fan, like the fires you're talking about, or natural disasters, or an active shooter situation, there was this situation, this terrorist situation in London, just a couple of days ago,
Yeah.
and I think there was 3 civilians who ended up subduing this guy.
Right. With
You know, nobody complains about toxic masculinity
yeah.
when men are doing what they do best. And people will say the argument to that is, well, yeah, because they're not at that point, they're not exhibiting toxic masculinity. They're using it in a positive way. It's like, no, they're using the same characteristics. They're just using it and harnessing it the same way. So it's like people are conflating bad behavior with masculinity in and of itself somehow being toxic.
Yeah, one of my more questioned and offensive lines to people is, we're not going to get, if we got rid of toxic masculinity, who would do our killing for us? Right? As long as we're asking men to be the ones out there with guns, if we're asking men to be the ones on the front lines, police departments, fire departments, military, then there's always going to be an element of quote unquote toxic masculinity, because you don't get to take a population and say, hey, if shit goes wrong, you guys here, we're going to be the ones to ask you to kill and die. Just knowing that, by the way, none of you are allowed to exhibit the exact same traits that we're going to ask you for if that happens. Right? And that, to me, that like, oh, that oftentimes makes some heads turn sideways.
Right.
Answer this for me. If we're in, and you know what, maybe this is incorrect, but I asked a workshop this a couple months ago. There were 9 men, 9 women, and the issue of masculinity had come up. I was like, right now, let's all be honest. If someone just came and banged on the door and you heard like, we're going to come in and fucking kill you, how many of you men would ask yourselves like, where are the babies? Let's go downstairs and hide with them. And how many of you women would go, okay, let's crack our necks, armor up, and go see who's at the door.
Right.
And maybe, you know, just call me crazy. Maybe it's completely nurture and it's not nature, but it was split 9 and 9. And maybe my co-teacher, who was a pretty wild chick, was like, I'll go fuck shit up at the door. I was like, okay, other than you, everybody else naturally picked their sides. And we can say, is that nature? Is that nurture? You know, you have boys. I've been around enough little boys and enough little girls to say that ain't nurture.
No.
The little boys are around the house just destroying whatever they can.
Right.
And each other. And oftentimes the little girls are not.
Right. Yeah, I think I think it is biological for the most part. Obviously your upbringing and the way you're raised and things like that play a part, but overwhelmingly biological. And then it's supported societally, right? Because it works. Right. It hasn't been until relatively recently, this modern times of ease and comfort that we live, where that's even been called into question. Mm-hmm. Right? Like it's always been expected. There's a great book called Manhood in the Making by David Gilmour, I believe. And what he does in the book is he goes, have you read the book?
No, I haven't.
It's really good. It's hard to get through, but it's a good book because it's more scientific, I guess, and research in nature than like a self-help book or a novel.
Yeah.
But he studies different cultures throughout the world and throughout history as well. And it's pretty interesting that there are striking similarities in the way most cultures throughout all of time in history view masculinity. And these are cultures that haven't even been exposed to each other. Right. So that leads you to believe that it's got to be more biological than it does societal.
Yeah, man, I remember a conversation, this was a year or so ago, with a very vehement feminist who was probably 5 foot, 102 pounds. And she literally looked me in the eye and said, you and I would be the same strength, or I would be stronger than you if I hadn't been from birth raised and conditioned to believe that I wouldn't. And I went,
oh, she thought it was all just like social conditioning.
Literally all social conditioning.
That's crazy.
And I said, do you think that the only reason I don't have ovaries and I can't give birth to a child is because from birth I've been socially conditioned not to believe that? And that, of course, got kind of the head turned sideways, and I'm like, well, I don't really want to continue this conversation.
Right.
It's like, come on, just
so
muscle
strange.
mass alone. I did not turn into 190 pounds because from birth people are like, you're going to be really strong when you're older.
If that's the way it worked, man, I'm gonna raise some freaking horses out of my boys.
Just
It's
the
crazy.
video of like,
Oh yeah, man. When they're sleeping, it's just like you're gonna be big, you're gonna be strong, you're gonna play in the NFL. Like,
you're gonna make so much money that daddy can retire early.
that's right, that's right. It's crazy, man. I don't know. Again, I mean, we know where it comes from. It's easy. It's been conditioned for us to believe this way, or the narrative anyway is being pushed. But let me shift gears for a minute.
Sure.
Talk to me because I read your book. Great book,
Yeah.
by the way. Actually, it's like really interesting because I wasn't sure. You sent it to me, and I wasn't sure what I was going to get from it as far as like how it was laid out.
Mm-hmm.
But I really like that it's just like short and punchy and in your face.
Thank you.
I really like that from the perspective of I don't have a long attention span, but I also like getting right to the point of things, like stripping all the BS out of it and just getting right to the point. So talk to me about the uncivilized methodology or ethos, if you will.
Sure. I wrote it specifically for that reason and for men, where when I sat down with the woman who designed it, she's like, you can't have this be a novel. You can't have this be 40-page chapters. You just got to hit guys to where they can almost open it at any point and look right at it. And I came up with this idea, Ryan, because I did this wild year of journey after my life fell apart a couple years ago. And this was 2016. And I was in search of answering the question of who am I? Now, my ex-wife and I had lost a pregnancy, and then she had walked out, and then my business partnership had fallen apart, all in a very relative short time. So here I am kind of left without the pillars of identity that we hang our hats on. I was like, God, who am I? And this was a brand new question, which I imagine you asked in a similar situation, which is, who am I as a man? And I went, oh shit, I've never even thought of that. And so all along this journey, I was looking towards men, and I had very clear examples or very delineated examples of some projects that I did. One being living in an ashram for a couple months in a spiritual center in Guatemala. And I met these beautiful men. I met these heart open, yogi, vegan, everything was about connecting with the divine and living an artistic purpose. And I was like, you guys are amazing. I don't know how well you do in New York City, or or in a fight.
Right. Sure.
And can you God bless you, but can you pick your body weight off the floor on a barbell? And I came from an MMA background, a CrossFit background, athletic background. So there was just something about that style of masculinity that I thought I can take from this, but it's not complete. And then I went and did a month-long course with Boulder Outdoor Survival School, which was gnarly. It's like just living in the woods with a knife, a water bottle, a blanket, and a bunch of dudes who were far more mountain men than they were societal. Right? These are guys that were like, I can just walk in the woods and not come back. Like, oh, okay, cool. You're going to teach me how to do a bunch of stuff too. How will you guys be with a family? How will you be interacting with a woman? Because I actually do want to interact with women again. I do want to have a family. I don't want to just be a hermit with my dog in my little tent, 100 miles in the woods. So when I was coming off of that quest at the end of that year, I thought, I feel like I'm being asked to either go left or go right, either go ashram or go woods. And what I really wanted was something in the middle. And so even though I joke with guys, it's like at the time I felt like my options were like, go be a Navy SEAL or be like a vegan feminist poet.
I don't know about those. Yeah.
Where's the combination of the middle? Where is the primal celebrating what's amazing about traditional masculinity, which there is so much, and also the divine or the conscious, which is the emotional piece, the space holding, the healing of trauma, the healing of past wounds. And so, the story is I was in New York City living with a guy named Adam Cobb, another TED speaker. And we had gotten up at like 5 o'clock in the morning to go to the gym. And the night before I led a men's group there and had a guy ask me about losing weight and how he can navigate not going to McDonald's. That was his challenge. And on the way to the gym in the morning, my buddy was like, "Hey, when was the last time you ate McDonald's?" I was like, "I don't know, man. Like, I actually don't know. I think maybe 20 years. Like, I don't eat that shit. It's civilian food." And he stopped, Ryan, and he took his phone out and he started filming me. And he's like, "Tell me about, like, what do you mean civilian food?" And I was like, "Look at how we live, man. Like, we're two single guys in New York City. We don't have a TV. We don't have alcohol in the house. We don't have drugs in the house. We're not just here banging a bunch of chicks. Last night we stayed up and talked about how our relationship with our fathers has shaped us. Like, this isn't how civilized men live." And we went downstairs, we went to the gym, we worked out real hard, and the whole time I was thinking, like, what is the outcome of living in civilization? Right? The standard path for men who aren't diving into work like yours and mine, who aren't following podcasts, who aren't going to workshops, who aren't connecting with other intentional men. What is the outcome for them? And I thought, okay, every negative statistic I see, from heart disease, from assault, domestic violence, divorce, addiction, porn, alcohol, that's what happens when you plug into the machine. That's what civilizing will do to you. So what if I can put something together to give guys another option and uncivilize them? So that's how it all came about.
I love it, man. I love it. Cause when you say that, I think the word that comes to mind for me is domestication, right? And I think we're talking about something that's very, very similar, is, tapping into that primal side of us without being a savage either, right? Like that's not the objective either, right? No. Do you get that a lot? Do people conflate what you're trying to do with, hey, we're just trying to be uncivilized, I guess, you know what I mean? Or the opposite of that?
I use the play on words, obviously, but I've got people who are extremely triggered by that word. Extremely. And, I was taking a cab. I was in Hawaii and split a cab with this woman who I randomly met. I was like, "Oh, you're waiting for a cab? I'm waiting for a cab." And no cabs had come. Thus, we decided to take one together. And she asked what I do. And I said, my goal is to uncivilize men. And her head whipped to the side like I'd slapped her. She's like, "Uncivilized is what happens in Vegas. Uncivilized is what happens at my work every day." And I was like, holy shit. Like, first of all, first of all, I'm sorry that's your life experience. And take a breath. Let me explain that's actually what civilized men do. That's men who go back to work on Monday or go back to their wives on Sunday night or have bought into the way of the unexamined, unintentional way of men. So yeah, I do get some kickback to it, and that's fine. I did this to create conversation, not just to add more vanilla into the world of, just be a good guy.
Just more noise, right?
More white noise, more just blah.
How did you come up with the 4 topics or points that you had made in the book as well? Like, how did you distill it down into that?
The fight, fuck, feed, feel?
Yeah.
That was what I thought men need to know right now. Like, 2 of them are the primal, fight and fuck. That's primal, right? If a man doesn't know his own body, isn't cultivating strength, whether that fight is, I know how to wrestle with a guy on a mat, or I know how to set a goal and go fight for it. I know how to fight for my family. I know how to fight for my vision, to bring my vision to life. If you're not doing that, life's hard. And life's not, hard's not the right term. Life's numb, right? Life is uninspired. So fight for something. And then fuck, right? I teach a lot about sexuality. I talk to women all day long and men who are like, "I don't have a good sex life. I have so much shame around sex." And, is it just fucking? No, I have a big plaque in my office that says, "Fuck them with words." And that's my writing mantra. It's like, let's get back to admitting that guys like to tussle and we like to fuck things. And guess what?
Yeah.
So do women. So let's just forget about not talking about that. So that was the primal side. And then the divine side, we got to feed our souls. Right? We have to feed ourselves information, knowledge, education, and feed our lives, feed our families with that same thing. As opposed to just, I can spend 2 hours on Instagram, And I can come away with having looked at a lot of little pictures and some, some dopamine, but I'm not taking a class. I'm not interested. I'm not listening to a podcast. I'm not reading a book. Like you probably know as well as like the average, I think after high school, the average American reads 0 books.
Yeah.
It's
It's insane.
terrible,
I mean, we
right?
have so much great information out there. It's like, why wouldn't you consume this?
It's crazy. And I'm curious if it's actually 0, are people reading less than 0? Because I read like a book a week. But let's just say the number's not good.
Mm-hmm.
So feed yourself, feed your soul, feed yourself with art, feed yourself with inspiration. And then lastly, guys got to feel. We absolutely need to feel. Before we get to bypass feelings, we have to feel them. It doesn't mean we have to let them take us on this journey and live entirely from feeling, right? I am an advocate of stoicism, but I'm an advocate of saying, I know what I feel first. Now I'm going to make the decision to not let that completely derail and guide me. Right? We just have to look at male mental health rates or even male suicide rates and say, okay, I don't want guys crying all day long. Right? I don't think that's the purpose. But yet, if you have an authentic emotion, express it so you can get back to doing what you're supposed to be effing doing. As opposed
and not only express it, but express it in a constructive way. I think that's where it becomes a problem. Like if you're expressing emotions because, and I've said to my boys, hey, now's not the time to cry. And people will look at that and judge that negatively, although that's reality. Like there's a time and a place to cry, and there's a time and a place not to cry. And I think if we can understand what those two are, not that it's never cry and not that it's always cry,
right?
It's a much more healthy approach to life.
Completely agree. And that's very different though than boys don't cry.
Sure.
Boys never cry.
There has to be context and depth and meaning behind it.
Absolutely. Men never cry. That is a terrible, it's a destructive sentence. But I agree with you. And I've wrote about it. I've asked, we hear all of this. We want more sensitive men. I want more sensitive men. And even guys, like guys need to be more vulnerable. We need to be more sensitive. Like, okay.
Who says that?
I hear this from women.
Women.
Yeah, mostly.
But do you think that's what women really want?
Ryan, I've done this. Like actually ask them, okay, you want a more vulnerable, I did this in a workshop. Imagine if you have a guy that twice a year breaks down because something happens, there's a reason for it, and he expresses emotion, he cries in front of you and says like, oh, my dad died, my dog died, this thing, I'm blah, 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 once or twice a year. And they're like, oh my God, that would be beautiful. I'm like, okay, how about once a month? And they're like, well, yeah, maybe that would, like, okay, how about once a week? I'm like, like, how about once a day or more often than you are?
Right.
And it's like the look of disgust. I'm like, wait a minute. If we go back 9 minutes in this conversation, when all 7 of you just said, I want more vulnerable, sensitive men, is there a specific line? Is it like once every 3 months a guy gets a quota? Or is it actually that you don't want someone that's more sensitive and vulnerable? You want someone who has access to that sensitivity and vulnerability and can decide and make a choice. Am I going to express this? Am I not? As opposed to a guy that's just overrun and falling down with emotion all the time. So no, I also think it's a societal dogma that it's like, you want to get a bunch of women to clap and tell you you're doing great, just stand up and yell, we need more vulnerable men.
No, that's a great distinction, because it's easy to say you want something, and then when you get it, it's like, oh, maybe I didn't really want that. Mm-hmm. And I think the point that you made, where you said, I think you said a man makes his choice on whether or not he expresses it. I might take that a step further and say, is very conscious and intentional about how he expresses it, right? So I love that you're talking about being tapped into it and having this understanding and feeling and knowing where you come from. But if you're boobing around all day like an idiot, and you're doing that in front of your woman, you're undermining your own authority and credibility and leadership efforts in front of her. Now, if you approach it with the attitude of, hey, hon, I've been dealing with it, and I've had conversations with my wife about this. I've been dealing with this stuff at work, and I'm a little frustrated at now because X, Y, and Z, and it's got me down. But here's what I'm going to do about it.
Mhm.
Like, that's an expression of emotion, potentially even a display of vulnerability, if you want to use that term. I'm cautious to use that term. I can tell you why. But it's also a masculine approach because it's done from the position of action and results oriented. I'm doing this because I'm trying to fix it, not just for the sake of doing it.
Yeah, guys, what's popping in my head is we just need to have access to our hearts and admit that they exist and understand that we can run feelings and energy through them. If we don't, like, the difference between clean anger and rage is one comes through your heart. I'm allowed to be angry. I'm telling you that I'm angry. That's very different than punching a hole in the wall.
Right.
And throwing something, one of which bypasses our hearts. So I completely agree with you that there is a way to say it. And it's I'm not a fan of the word vulnerability either. I go back to jiu-jitsu. Like, what do you want me to be? Have like a vulnerable ground game?
Why would I want to show you my weaknesses?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Do you want me to have like
Expose my
vulnerable
flaws.
finances? Or like, oh yeah, just like, do you leave your front door unlocked? No. You have to have good boundaries. And yet, let's also be honest. So if your partner comes to you and says, I can tell something's on your mind or bothering you, what is it? It's very different to say, you know what, I'm frustrated at work. I have this situation. I'm not sure what to do with it. I think I'm going to do X, Y, or Z, or I am going to do X, Y, or Z. That's a very different conversation than nothing, I'm fine.
Right.
In which case you've shut her out and you've actually just denied the reality of the situation. That's very different, again, of then putting your head in her lap and crying for the next 4 hours because work is tough.
Right.
Right. Like, the guys, jiu-jitsu, choke me.
That's what they're supposed to do. That's the point. You're supposed to get choked and choke other people. This is why women leave men, though.
Yeah.
And they usually leave for, maybe this is not fair to say, but it seems to me they leave for men who aren't good for them because they're so sick of the nice guy and the crybaby that they need a reprieve from that. So they're like, let me go to this bad boy, this guy who's not good, who's not healthy for me.
Right.
And they end up making these mistakes because of it. But, and I'm not going to say it's a man's fault, but look, if that's how you're behaving, if you're the perpetual nice guy and you're crying like incessantly and you're not coming up with answers to your own problems, like how long is she going to be attracted to that? I mean, she's going to be repulsed by it.
Repulsed is the word, right? Like the actual word when I've asked women, it's repulsive. One of the tenets of the ethos is be dangerous but not a danger. And that is extremely attractive to women and to other men. It's I have the capacity to create great violence, and I don't. Therefore, I don't. Like, as you know, in the communities that we're in, there aren't a lot of jiu-jitsu guys going out and getting in street fights.
No.
Like, I know a lot of guys, and I've been in the situation where I've just kind of laughed and been like, trust me. One, you don't want to do this. Two, I'm not going to get sued over a parking space.
Right.
Like, fucking take you down and choke your ass out. So here, have the parking space. Go for it. Right? Be dangerous, but not a danger. I think when a woman knows that you are not dangerous, then she intuitively knows you cannot protect her offspring, or even yourself. And maybe some women are attracted to that are hyper dominant, but the vast majority are not. And that statement can be taken across not just the physical, but are you dangerous at work, right? Are you good? You have your game down. Are you skilled? Are you dangerous in your finances? Like, yep, I understand the market. I know how to do things. You're dangerous. Your marketing's dangerous. It's real damn good, right? It's not a danger. Sure. You're not using the toxic shadow side of, it's not a picture of you in like doing a yoga pose in your skivvies.
I was thinking about doing that, and then I figured everybody would be repulsed to use that word again, and I'd lose a lot of people. Yeah, that would be really strange. Not only because it would be inappropriate, it just would be strange because I really just don't engage in that behavior at all. So
at all.
Yeah, no, I like that. I think it is important. I also think that's the the term that you'd use is the X factor, right? When whether it's a man or a woman who observes another man who is dangerous but not a danger,
Right.
what I hear is they're competent.
Mm-hmm.
And because they're competent, they've developed a sense of confidence that they don't need to go tell everybody. Like it's the old adage of you'd never take your car to like Honest Auto Care, right? Because if they have to tell you they are, they aren't.
Right.
So if you've got a guy who's like, I'm amazing and I'm rich and I can kick your ass and I can do all these things, it's like, I don't know if you can, because quite honestly, somebody who can do that won't need to share it, and other people will just sense it.
Right. You were in the military. It's like the quietest guys in the room are the ones everyone's like, I don't know, I don't want to mess with him.
Don't mess with that guy.
Right. And the Jersey Shore guy was just like, hold me back. I'm gonna beat everybody's ass. Okay. Calm down, Cupcake. Yeah.
Yeah. No, and the other thing you talk about is, as well as you talk about, and we alluded to this a little bit from the feeling perspective, but you talked about earlier, a lot of guys have problems with intimacy and sex. And I think the root of that is, you said, shame. I'm really curious where you go with that.
Sure. Most women I have met, and this is a shitty thing to say, but it's true, have been traumatized in some way by a man sexually. I've taught self-defense for long enough to say who in the room has fought off a rapist, a sexual assault, something, and every hand in the room goes up. And I thought, okay, well, maybe that's just people coming to a self-defense workshop. Then I got asked to teach where they didn't know I was going to come in. And the same thing, 8 out of 10 hands go up. I was like, holy shit, that's a lot of women. Mm-hmm. And yet I think if we ask men, how often have you felt ashamed or been shamed, like literally been laughed at, been pointed, something that made you feel small and bad, quote unquote bad. You're a bad person. You're a bad boy for their sexuality. That leads to their sexuality being expressed through shadow means, through pornography, through violence, through violating consent, through not having authentic expression. Like, I ask a lot of guys, do you know what turns your woman on? And I'll get the like, yeah, she likes it when I finger her. Like, no, that wasn't what I was asking. Do you know what turns her on beyond friction? And beautiful. Some may, many don't. And then I'll ask them, does your woman know what turns you on? And they'll be like, yeah, I like it when she blows me. Like, no. Of course you do. I get it. But what turns you on beyond friction as well? And are you willing to say that? Are you okay looking your woman in the eye and saying, hey, this is what I like. Mm-hmm. This is what I love about sex. This is what I want to do with you. This is why I want to do that. Or is that like a nail biting, oh my God, I can't talk to my wife about that. Right? I had a couple in a workshop. This is amazing. A month ago, and half of the workshop is I blindfold the women and have the men lead them around only using voice commands, and then have them blindfold the men, and same thing. And at the end of this section, I asked this couple who've been together for 7 years, I was like, how was that for you? And the woman was like, I loved blindfolding him and leading him around. Like, that was amazing. And I was like, how was that for you, sir? And he kind of got a little blushy and was like, I loved when she blindfolded me and led me around. I was like, first of all, you guys owe me a Christmas card.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, have fun tonight. And why did it take 7 years for you guys to not have this conversation of, hey, and oftentimes, Ryan, it is because at some point someone got shamed. And therefore that feeling in their body of like, I can't talk about this. I can't talk about sex. Right? Sex and money. It's crazy how much shame and hiddenness we have around them. So that's what I do with it is first, like, have guys, and I've done this in workshops. So like, okay, tell the guy sitting across from you, what's the one thing you wish you had more from in your sex life with your wife? And if you can't tell a dude who's like, hey, I got no judgment, and by the way, I got to answer this question too, so we're both kind of in this together.
Right. If
you can't say it to him, how are you going to say it to the person who has the ability to reject you to person who has the ability to hurt you, has the ability to go, oh my God, I can't believe you want to do that, you effing weirdo.
Right. So it seems to me it's judgment and fear of rejection.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, look, let's be real about this. Those are two threats those are real. Like those are legitimate threats.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you overcome that when it comes to being intimate with your spouse?
First, you have to own it in yourself. So can you actually say it out loud? Can you say it to the person in the mirror? You're like, I really want my woman to suck on my toes. That turns me on. I really like power dynamics. That's a lot of what I teach is power dynamics of dominance and submission. Mm-hmm. Right? Are you willing to say that? Are you willing? I am a dominant person sexually. I am a, in quotes, dominant in that world. So in order for me to, before I can say that on a date, I have to be able to say it to you on a podcast. And I get it. Not everybody's being interviewed and all the things, but would you be okay with your friends knowing? Would you be okay with your guy friends knowing? Would you be okay with just, again, first and foremost, just being able to say it out loud? You know, I know you've done goal setting with people where I've said, like, tell me this thing you want to be. And they're like, I want to be a writer. They're like, I'm sorry, what was that?
Yeah, say it a little louder, please.
And they're like, I want to be a writer. I'm like, what? And until they can actually, like, it's okay. But it's the same thing. It's rejection. It's fear. It's fear of abandonment. So really, it's owning it in yourself. And then I say, too, creating a life that affirms to you, I'm powerful, I'm strong, I'm confident, I'm going to be okay. If this person says, like, oh, my God, dominance, what an awful person you are. I just shake her hand and go, hey, you're not the right person for me. Go have a great life.
Right.
As opposed to, oh my God, she's right. I'm such a horrible person. I never should have said that. I can't believe it. My mom was right. My sisters were right. Society's right. Oh my God, it's so awful. So it's really first owning it with yourself, and then it becomes, Ryan, a practice. Right? You don't jump in with your wife. It's like 7 years in and be like, hey, can we talk tonight? I've always wanted to tie you up and beat you with whips and pour hot wax on you and do this in the middle of Madison Square Garden.
Yeah, she might be slightly creeped out by that.
So start by just naming a simple desire and deal with what comes up in your body of like, oh my God, I had to do this exercise, brother, at a workshop at Esalen where the woman said for a week, you have to be inconvenient to people. And I was like, oh, and I fought in a fucking cage, man, multiple times. And yet I would sit there with my hands shaking and be like, hey, would you guys mind clearing my dinner plate tonight? And just sit there like, and
that's a really good activity, man. Right? I like that.
Especially for a guy who prides himself on being, I'm not inconvenient, I'm hyper competent.
Right.
Because in the family I grew up in, I was worried about getting booted all the time or being abandoned. So I had to make myself like, no, I got everything. I can handle everything. So you start with little stuff like that as opposed to the high voltage, perhaps sexual ask, and get used to owning, one, I'm worth having someone clear my dinner plate for. And then what do you know? They just said, sure. And did it, and I didn't.
And it was no big deal.
It was surely like 0.01% of a big deal to them, even though my heart rate was beating out of my chest and I was pouring sweat.
So I'm writing that down because those like societal challenges are really good. I did one where I think it was for a week or so. I had to ask for a discount every time I spent money.
Right.
So if I was at like the retail store, I'm like, hey, what's your discounts? If I was at McDonald's, because we were talking about McDonald's earlier. Yeah. Hey, can you give me a free meal? Like I had to ask for a discount or something else every single time I went. And it was so uncomfortable at first. And at the end I was like, even when they said, they're like, no, we don't have deals. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Just thought I'd ask.
Yeah.
And it was like no big deal.
But how was it the first time, right? Or the second time?
It was so miserable because I told myself all kinds of stories. And the story that I told myself is I don't want people to think one of two things. I don't want people to think I'm cheap.
Yeah.
And I don't want people to think I'm broke. And those were the two stories that I had made, created.
Yeah.
And nobody thought that. I mean, maybe a few people thought that, but very few people actually thought that I was cheap or that I was broke.
Right.
And when I kind of broke those stories, it freed myself to not have to be concerned with the fact that people may or may not think I have money or don't. It's irrelevant to me. It doesn't matter what they think about my financial status.
Absolutely. You are independent of the good opinion of other people, which is a massive, massive bridge to walk over. And are we able to do it 100% fully without being a sociopath? I'm not sure. But can you get much, much better at it? Because what did that lesson, it taught me that I can ask for stuff. And I've done the same thing, asking for discounts and even practice. Like, hey, would you like us to bag this for you? I'm like, yep, please bag it. At the grocery store, and then sit there and be like, I can bag it myself. You can bag it yourself. You don't lift all these weights, so you can't bag stuff. All the story. But then again, in relationship, if we go back to that dynamic, how healthy is it to be able to ask for a need to be met, or to feel like you have the right, that you have the worth? So to go back to your original question, you build a self-esteem and a self-worth that allows for the rejection and the fear to come, and you not to take it in and take it on and let it dictate how you think about and feel about yourself, and therefore dictate your actions.
Yeah, those stories are hard to break, man, because they've been conditioned since the time we're little. I mean, especially when it comes to rejection. I even think about this on the path to masculinity. There's things that I've said or asked other people that were mentors, or I thought they were, and they made me feel stupid for asking it. Mm. And I thought to myself, I'm like, man, like, how else would I have ever learned this? I don't know how to do that. Like, I have to ask at some point. I didn't know how to do it. So, like, why would you make people feel stupid? It's something I'm actually very aware with my kids, is when they ask me things, even in my head, I'm like, oh, why are they asking me this dumb question? I'm like, it's actually not a dumb question. Like, they don't know.
Yeah.
Like, how else are they going to know unless they ask? And so I make a very conscious effort not to mock or belittle my kids for asking questions. One thing for being attracted, like my oldest is getting more attracted to girls now, and I don't tease him about girlfriends, because being attracted to girls is healthy. So I'm not going to tease him about it. And I do the same thing with my daughter. I don't tease her for thinking a boy's cute, because that's good behavior. That should be encouraged.
Yeah, think of how much I get a lot of guys that come to me fresh out of divorces, and they're entering into the dating world again. And these are guys with huge business companies of 1,000 employees. They've accomplished so much in their life, and will come up and say, well, how do I walk up and start talking to her?
Yeah.
Like and it go back to, what it is. How do I not feel how I felt in third grade when I told my buddies I like Susan, and they all went, Brian and Susan sitting in a tree, and they shamed them.
Yep.
And that sensation is in like the core of their gut, that's what they're trying to work around. So I agree. Our lives as adults is managing and reorganizing those stories into what's true now, that's just another person standing there drinking coffee. I'm more than welcome to go up and politely engage in conversation with her, and there's nothing wrong with liking girls.
Right. Well, I think that's the thread of your book, and going through this, is putting yourself out there, taking risks, taking chances, stepping into challenges, because the more that we do that in every context, I think the better off we're going to be, and the easier things become. Not because those things are easier, but because we're more adequately prepared to handle those things physically, mentally, emotionally. And that's why I really like the concept of the book and the Uncivilized Life. It just makes total sense to me.
Thanks, man. It's not life. It's not easy to be human. Stuff's going to happen. Right. And there is no day. I think it was David Data's like, there's no day when this just magically stops being hard. When you just run, it's like, oh, wow, I'm 46. I'm a millionaire. I've done all the things. I've climbed the mountains. Like, my life's just going to be on cruise control for the next 78 years till I die. That does not happen. And I think for most guys, if they're honest, if it did, at like the 2-week point, I would be like chewing on the leg of the table.
Oh,
like,
definitely.
I'm going to see how many push-ups I can do next month. I'm going to figure out some way to create a challenge. So if we can shift the focus away from challenge bad to, oh, holy shit, challenge good. This is it, man. Like, I want to rub up against things. I want to learn. I want to have to ask that question. Like, hey, Ryan, I don't know how to do this thing. Do you know how to do it? beautiful. Yeah, I'll show you. I want to
Mm-hmm.
figure stuff out on my own. I want to be like hands deep in life. I want it to be an adventure. Like that word, like guys used to be seeking adventure all the time. I remember my dad saying he hiked across the Adirondacks for like an entire summer. And I remember he's saying he like had a sickle and he like took the head off a rattlesnake one time. He told me that story as a kid, and I was like, he is the coolest
You're
guy
like,
on the
awesome.
planet. Yeah. I think that sense was like instilled in us, of
Yeah.
books. Books when we were kids were all about guys going on adventures.
Yeah.
And
Huck
it's not,
Finn and
yeah, right?
yeah.
Well, Call of the Wild, like
Yeah.
stuff where you're like, holy shit, these guys, the Last American Man. I mean, there's so many amazing books of adventure, but it's not an adventure without challenge, guys. Like it's not like I got in the car and then I just drove super smooth and then I showed up. That's my adventure. Like
Right.
adventure sucks.
Yeah, it's the risk and yeah, it's the risk and the challenge and the heartache and the hardship and the valleys that actually make it meaningful. Because if it didn't have that, there would be no purpose or meaning to it. There really wouldn't. I
No.
mean, it might be nice occasionally. You win the lottery. You're like, cool, won the
Yeah.
lottery. I mean, I'm not gonna say that wouldn't be a good thing, but at the same time, fighting for the business and being in my financial planning practice for 10 years almost before moving into this and struggling for a couple of years and getting this off the ground. Now it's like, man, there's a lot more significance in what I'm doing because
Hell
I
yeah.
created it.
Hell yeah. I remember your post about like one guy came to my event. One
Yeah.
guy showed up for my thing. I led so many events in New York. It was like, you're the only person. Do a webinar, like one woman, and I'm sleeping with her, but she came to my webinar. There's one, like nobody shows up. And now in hindsight, I'm so glad that every time I was like, F this, I'm quitting. My buddy was like, do not quit. If you got,
Mhm.
doesn't matter. Talk to anybody who's anywhere, and they're going to go back and tell you about those early challenges. But even for a guy, like when I look up to you and go, oh my God, it happened, forget. It's like, wait a minute. He didn't just start a podcast and have a
No. Heck
listen
no.
on the first week. He didn't just like, oh, he just moved to a house in Maine. It's crazy. That must have just been like where he's lived for. Oh no, there's all of
Yeah.
this struggle.
I think we intuitively know that, but we just hide it because we just, what I think what it is it's an excuse. So, for example, if I look at your success and I think, well, Traver's got all this stuff figured out and look how successful he is with, he did the TED Talk and now he's got this book and he's so successful. If I can discount what it took for you to get it,
Yeah.
then that lets me off the hook because I'm really not willing to do all that work you had to do.
Right.
So if I can just say, oh, he just had luck, like he was just in the right place at the right time, then it discounts what I have to do. And also at this point, I just have to wait. Like I just have to wait to get lucky. As soon as my ship comes in, then I'll be good too. And so it discounts all the work and effort that's required to get some level of success in our lives.
Exactly. I hear it. It's a joke amongst public speakers where we hear one of the most ubiquitous lines I hear is, you're so lucky you're a good speaker.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I have masterminds, I have hired coaches, I have flown all over the world, I have thrown up behind backstage, I have freaked out on. You have no idea how lucky I am to be a good speaker. Yeah. Go F off.
Yeah, well, I think that's why it's really important that we be realistic about what it's taken for people to be successful. But it's also an important reason why having successful people in your life, because they're going to paint a realistic picture for you.
For sure.
I mean, we get into trouble. I think you actually talked about it somewhere in the book about expectations, if I remember correctly. Maybe it was another book, but we have these false sense of expectations, and then when our reality doesn't meet those expectations, we're let down. It's like, well, it wasn't the thing that went wrong is your expectations were wrong. That was the problem. Like from the premise, you set it up wrong. If you had clear expectations about how long you'd need to do it, how many presentations you needed to give, how many actual hours you'd need to research and study and present, then you wouldn't be let down as much. In fact, you would just meet your expectations and you'd probably exceed them as well.
Exactly. I despise the sort of coaching question of, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? And I tell people like, what would you do if you knew it was going to take you about 7 years of just grinding your face on rock bottom and getting kicked in the dirt and taking 2 steps forward and 5 steps back? And then what would you do? Because most likely that's the reality of this thing that you want to create. If it's big and if it's important, then you're going to go through some hell. So why not that's the thing I want to know from people. Not what would you do if tomorrow morning you could wake up and boom, you'd have it all.
Right.
So what are you willing to suffer for?
Again, that's not reality, right? It's not even dealing in reality. Like, what if everything was magical and you lived in fairy tale land?
I'm just going to manifest this weekend.
Yes, manifest it, yes. Traver, I appreciate you, brother. It's been a good conversation. I want to ask you a couple of questions as we wind things down. Obviously, like, dude, I don't even know if I got into anything that I wrote down on the notes because there's so much to go through. Just go buy the book, guys, because it's a good book and you'll get everything that we talked about here and a lot more.
Thank you.
The first question, what does it mean to be a man?
I'm not plugging your book, but it is all about sovereignty to me. It is about a guy who says, I have limited to the best to my ability, the input, my relationship to the input to the outside world. So I am okay on my own. I am whole on my own. I am healthy on my own. I am leading in every area of my life. To me, that is what a man does. And that leading or consciously not leading, right? I have a bookkeeper. Why? Because I hired her. Because I am not gifted with numbers. But that's very different than just hoping that my numbers add up every month.
Right.
So to me, a man is a sovereign human. That is someone who, is, to the best of his ability, is competent in a number of fashions, is strong, is present, right? Is clear, knows where he's going, why he's going there, and is also of service. He's not just an island. He's there for his family. He's there for his community. He's there for his country. He's there for the world. If those are possible, right? I have a guy that has an autistic son. That's his world. He doesn't need to be on Instagram. He doesn't need to be on Oprah, but he's leading in every capacity of his life, and every moment of his life is of service.
That's powerful. I'm glad you said that, because one thing a lot of guys will say is some guys with either injuries or illness or disease, medical conditions they're dealing with, is they feel inferior as a man. And according to what you just said, it's if you're leading your domains, you don't have to feel inferior, even if you can't, lift 400 pounds or whatever. Right. Leading your domains, that's where you need to be.
Amen. And you're fighting in those domains. You fight hurt. You fight in those domains. I say the same thing to guys. You don't have to lift the weights I do. And there are guys that I'm not going to come within a country mile of outlifting. Yet what matters is, do you get up and go to the gym? And if you're physically unable to go to the gym, what are you doing to make yourself stronger in your head, in your heart, in your spirit?
Right on, brother. Well, how do we connect with you and learn more? And obviously we can want to pick up a copy of the book. Where do we get it?
Beautiful. So I spend most of my time on Instagram, even though we kind of bashed it. I still love it. I'm at Traver Boehm, TraverBoehm, and my book is at www.manuncivilized.com/the-book.
Excellent. We'll sync it all up so the guys know where to go. I was really looking forward to this conversation. The conversation did not disappoint.
Thank you, sir.
You know how you talk with some people, you're like, man, I really connected with that individual. I feel like that was the case. I'm looking forward to getting to know you better and just maintaining and building this relationship. So thanks for taking some time.
Cheers. Thanks for having me.
All right, brother.